I never thought I'd see the day when my own phone lines out here on my ranch, miles from the nearest strip mall, would be deliberately cut. At first, I figured it was some freak accident. Maybe a storm, maybe a raccoon with a death wish. But when I walked up to the junction box and saw those clean-clipped wires dangling like a pair of snapped veins, I knew exactly who had done it: the HOA. They thought by severing my phone lines they could isolate me, silence me, maybe even scare me into submission. But they underestimated one thing: I don't scare easily. And I sure as hell don't roll over when someone tries to push me off my own land. So instead of crawling to them or letting their petty war break me, I came up with a plan. A plan so simple, so poetic, that it turned their harassment into their own undoing. Let's just say the next time the HOA picked up their phones to complain about me, their call didn't go where they expected. It went straight to the sheriff. My name's Tom Callahan. I'm 58 years old, and if you've ever driven past the old ranch road that snakes along the creek bed, you've probably seen my place. Folks in this county know me as the stubborn rancher who never quite fit into the polished suburban mold that's been creeping closer year after year. Truth is, I never wanted to fit in. My ranch is my home, my livelihood, and my peace. I was raised on land born to a father who fought in Vietnam and came back with a limp, a crooked smile, and a stubborn will that refused to bow to anyone. My old man taught me that fences are more than wood and wire. They're a promise that what's inside them is yours to protect. I carried that lesson my whole life. Now I'm not some outlaw hermit. I've got my wife Linda, who's been by my side for 30 years, putting up with my rough edges and making this house a home. We've raised kids here. We've watched grandkids play in the same dirt our children once did. Every morning, Linda makes coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and we sit on the porch together watching the sun crawl up over the pasture. Those are the moments that remind me why I worked so hard for this land. Our days used to be simple. I'd check on the cattle, fix whatever the coyotes tore up overnight, and mend fences that sagged under the Texas heat. In the evenings, I'd tinker in my workshop, maybe play a little guitar when the mood struck. Peaceful, steady, quiet, that's the way I liked it. But peace doesn't last forever, not when you've got neighbors who think your land is theirs to control. See, when we bought this property decades ago, it was ranch land as far as the eye could see. No one cared what color your barn was, or whether your grass stood at 3 inches or 6. Then the subdivision sprouted up just down the road, cookie-cutter houses, with pristine lawns and SUVs parked in driveways. And with those houses came the thing I hate more than fire ants: an HOA. Now, for anyone who's never had the pleasure, an HOA is like a nosy neighbor on steroids. They live to nitpick, they breathe to meddle, and once they get a taste of power, they treat it like their morning coffee, something they can't live without. This particular HOA had a president who fit every stereotype you've ever heard. Her name was Karen, no, I'm not joking, and she strutted around with a clipboard in hand like she was queen of the county. The woman had a voice that could cut through sheet metal and a permanent scowl etched onto her face. You know, the type pearls in the daytime wine glass in the evening and always hunting for someone to correct. At first I didn't think much of it. After all, my ranch wasn't part of their subdivision. I had my own deed, my own zoning, my own rights. Their bylaws stopped where their picket fences ended. Or so I thought. Still, I'd see Karen driving her golf cart down my road like she was on patrol, snapping pictures of my pasture, my barn, even my mailbox. I'd wave sometimes with all 5 fingers, sometimes not. She never waved back. I guess what really bothered them was that my ranch stood as a reminder of what they weren't. They had their perfect little lawns, but I had real land. They had ornamental shrubs. I had oaks older than their mortgage lenders. They had rules about paint colors. I had barns with honest rust and weathered wood. I lived free, and that drove them crazy. It wasn't just Karen either. The whole HOA board seemed to have it out for me. Maybe they thought if they made life miserable enough, I'd sell my acreage and let them sprawl their subdivision further into my pasture. But they didn't know me. Selling out was never in the cards. Linda used to tell me to let it slide, to not let those people get under my skin, and for a long time I did just that. I laughed it off when their letters showed up in my mailbox, demanding I comply with community standards. I shrugged when they complained about the sound of my tractor at dawn. I even bit my tongue when one of their board members told me my barn ruined the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. But I'll tell you something. There's only so much a man can ignore before the pot boils over. I worked hard for this land. I paid for every nail, every post, every fence line. And no clipboard queen with a suburban army was going to strip that from me. They didn't know it yet, but every time they tried to push me, I was filing it away, stacking it up like dry tinder. All it would take was one match to set the whole pile ablaze. And trust me, when the HOA finally crossed the line, I was ready to strike that match. But before I get ahead of myself, let me take you back to where it really started. Because the truth is, the phone lines didn't just get cut one day out of the blue. No, this war had been brewing for a long time. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. It began as these things often do, with a letter. I remember walking back from the barn one hot July afternoon, sweat soaking through my shirt, dust sticking to my boots, when I saw the envelope tucked inside my mailbox. It wasn't the electric bill or a flyer for the local feed store. It was crisp, official looking, with a logo at the top corner, the HOA's proud little crest. I tore it open right there at the fence line. Inside was a neatly typed letter full of legal-sounding nonsense about non-compliance with community standards. It told me in no uncertain terms that I had 30 days to repaint my barn to a more suitable shade that reflects neighborhood cohesion. I actually laughed out loud. My barn had been standing there longer than that subdivision had even existed. It was weathered red, the kind of color you only get from years of sun and storms, not a paint chip sample. I figured it had to be some clerical error. Maybe the letter was meant for someone else in their neat little cul-de-sac. So I tossed it aside and forgot about it. But a week later, another letter showed up. This one accused me of failing to maintain acceptable lawn length. Lawn. I didn't have a lawn. I had pasture, grass that grew for my horses, not for show. I shook my head, folded the letter up, and set it on the counter. Linda rolled her eyes when I showed it to her. "Tom," she said, "just ignore it. They'll realize they can't tell you what to do out here." I wanted to believe that, but something in my gut told me this wasn't a mistake. And sure enough, a few days later, the real trouble came rolling down my gravel driveway in the form of a white golf cart. Behind the wheel sat none other than Karen Queen of the HOA herself. Clipboard in hand, oversized sunglasses covering half her face, she looked like she was on safari hunting for infractions. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. She parked the cart by my fence and hollered, "Mr. Callahan, your property is in clear violation of HOA bylaws. This has to be addressed immediately." I leaned on my shovel and squinted at her. "Ma'am, I'm not in your HOA. This is my ranch, my land. Your bylaws don't mean a thing out here." Karen pursed her lips so tight they almost disappeared. "All properties adjoining the subdivision must maintain a harmonious appearance. Your barn, frankly, is an eyesore. And the length of your grass is for grazing, not grooming." I cut her off. "And this barn's been standing here longer than your subdivision's been on the map." Her nostrils flared. "We'll be issuing fines if you refuse to comply." That's when I laughed. Not a chuckle, but a deep belly laugh that made her face turn redder than a ripe tomato. "Good luck collecting, Karen. Send me all the monopoly money you want. I don't owe you a dime." She huffed, scribbled something on her clipboard, and drove off in a cloud of dust. I figured that would be the end of it, that once she realized I wasn't part of their little kingdom, she'd back off. But I was wrong. So very wrong. The letters kept coming, each one more aggressive than the last. They demanded I remove unsightly equipment from my property, meaning my tractor. They ordered me to reduce livestock odors as though my cattle were supposed to smell like lavender. They even had the gall to suggest I take down my American flag because it was too large and disruptive to neighborhood cohesion. Every time one of those letters showed up, I'd toss it straight into a shoebox I kept in the pantry. If they wanted to keep wasting paper, I'd keep collecting the evidence. Linda warned me not to let it get under my skin, but I could feel the irritation building like a slow burn in my chest. Then came the fines. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just noise, it was personal. The HOA sent me a certified letter claiming I owed them nearly $500 in penalties for continued noncompliance. $500 for doing nothing more than living on my own land the way I always had. I'll never forget the look on Linda's face when I showed her. Her eyes went wide and she shook her head. "Tom, they can't do this. You don't even belong to their association." "That's exactly right," I muttered, crumpling the letter in my fist. "But they're trying anyway." I sat on the porch that night, guitar in my lap, but I didn't play a note. I just stared out at my land, the moonlight painting the fields silver. For years, this ranch had been my safe haven, my sanctuary. And now some clipboard tyrant thought she could chip away at it with paperwork and intimidation. Not a chance. That was the spark. That was the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with some harmless nuisance. This was a fight. And if Karen and her HOA wanted a war, well, they'd just pick the wrong cowboy. I decided then and there I'd stop laughing it off. From that point forward, I was paying attention, watching, waiting, because I knew it was only a matter of time before they overplayed their hand. And when they did, I'd be ready. If the letters and fines were the first sparks, what came next was the wildfire. Karen and her merry little band of clipboard warriors weren't satisfied with just pestering me on paper. No, they decided it was time to crank up the pressure. And boy did they. It started with trespassing. I caught one of their board members, some guy named Stan, who looked like he'd never done a day of hard work in his life, standing in my pasture one morning, tape measure in hand. He was jotting numbers down, like he was surveying property lines. I marched right over Boots, crunching on the gravel, and barked, "You lost, Stan." He jumped so hard he nearly dropped his clipboard. We're just checking to see if your fencing complies with HOA guidelines." I leaned on the fence post, towering over him. "This ain't HOA property. You step foot on my land again and you won't be walking out with that clipboard." Stan mumbled something about community standards and scurried back through the subdivision like a rat retreating to its hole. But that was just the beginning. A week later, I noticed a car idling on the road outside my ranch. 2 women sat inside with cameras pointing their lenses toward my barn and pastures. Every few minutes, the flash went off as they snapped photos. When I walked up to ask what the hell they were doing, they sped off tires, spitting gravel. I later found those very photos plastered in the HOA's next letter with captions like, "Evidence of non-compliant equipment left in plain view," and "Livestock odor source identified." Livestock odor source, that's what they called my cattle. I couldn't make this nonsense up if I tried. Then came the false reports. Out of nowhere, animal control showed up at my ranch gate one afternoon. The officer told me they'd received complaints of neglected and malnourished horses. I just stared at him, dumbfounded. My horses were healthy, groomed, and well-fed, better treated than most of those subdivision pets that barely got walked once a week. The officer did his inspection, shook his head, and said, "Sir, I'm sorry. It's clear this was a bogus report. Happens more than you'd think with these HOAs." I watched him drive away, blood boiling. They'd stooped so low they were trying to weaponize county services against me. Next came the noise complaints. Karen claimed my tractor was disrupting community peace when I used it at sunrise. Now, anyone who's ever worked a ranch knows you start your day early because livestock doesn't wait for the sun to get comfortable. But according to Karen, my work hours needed to align with her brunch schedule. They even filed a complaint about my dog Duke barking at night. Duke was a loyal old hound who only barked when coyotes prowled near the pasture. Apparently, Karen preferred coyotes over cattle dogs. By now, it wasn't just letters, it was harassment. They called the zoning office trying to stir up trouble. They even left snide little comments on the town's community Facebook page. Some neighbors don't respect standards. Eyesore properties, lower everyone's home values. They never said my name, but everyone knew who they meant. And I'll tell you what, it worked. Not in the way they wanted, but in the way gossip always works. People in town started whispering. I'd walk into the diner for coffee, and I could feel eyes on me. Some neighbors asked politely if I was having issues with the HOA. Others just shook their heads and said, "Tom, you're tougher than they are. Don't let them win." Linda hated it. She'd always loved being part of this small community, chatting at the farmer's market, volunteering at church. Now she felt like every conversation carried a hidden judgment, and that made my blood boil even more. Because you can mess with me all you want, but when you drag my wife into it, when you make her life harder, make her lose sleep, that's crossing a line. One night I found her sitting at the kitchen table rubbing her temples. "Tom," she said softly, "I don't know how much more of this I can take. It feels like they won't stop until they break us." I put my hand over hers and looked her dead in the eye. "Linda, listen to me. They're not going to break us. They're just digging their own grave. Trust me." But even as I said it, I knew things were only going to get worse before they got better. Karen wasn't the type to back down. No, she was the type who doubled down every time. And I was right. Because just when I thought they couldn't get any lower, the HOA pulled a stunt so underhanded, so dangerous that it pushed me past the point of no return. It wasn't a letter this time. It wasn't a fine or a photo. It was something far more serious. The day I found my phone lines cut hanging loose like dead snakes in the dirt, that was the day the war truly began. When I found those phone lines dangling cut clean, like someone had taken a pair of bolt cutters to them, it confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't about rules or community standards. This was a vendetta. They wanted to make life so miserable for me that I'd either bend to their will or pack up and leave. But that's the thing about folks like me. You push hard enough, you don't break us. You just make us sharper. So while Linda called the phone company from her cell demanding a technician come fix the mess, I grabbed a notebook and started writing. Dates times incidents, every single thing they'd done. The letters, the fines, the trespassing, the photos, the bogus complaints, and now the sabotage. Because I'd realized something: people like Karen thrive on intimidation, but they're sloppy. They think their position of power makes them untouchable. And when someone feels untouchable, they stop covering their tracks. And that's when they make mistakes. I started digging, literally at first. I set up trail cameras along the fence line, pointed at the junction box where the phone lines were. I rigged one camera in the oak tree facing the subdivision's back path. If anyone came snooping around again, I'd catch them red-handed. Then I went digital. I dusted off my old desktop computer, logged into county records, and started looking up the HOA's filings. Took me a while, those records are a maze, but once I found their incorporation paperwork, I grinned. You see, the HOA's jurisdiction stopped cold at the subdivision's property lines. They had no legal authority over my ranch. None. Zilch. Every letter, every fine, every complaint they were, all smoke and mirrors, intimidation tactics, designed to scare me into compliance. But here's where it got juicy. Turns out Karen had been overstepping for years. There were records of other homeowners complaining about her abuse of power. She'd threatened to fine people for having the wrong color Christmas lights. She'd sent nasty letters to a widow down the street because her late husband's truck lowered neighborhood value. This wasn't just me. Karen had a history. I also discovered that the HOA had been funneling money to a contractor who just so happened to be Karen's cousin. Landscaping jobs, maintenance repairs, even repainting mailboxes, all billed at inflated prices, all approved by Karen and her loyal little board. Shady. Absolutely. Illegal. Potentially. I printed everything out, page after page. By the time I was done, I had a stack of evidence thick enough to make a lawyer whistle. But I wasn't finished. One evening I sat down with my neighbor, Old Man Harris. He owned the small spread of land just east of mine. Over a glass of iced tea on his porch, I told him what was going on. He leaned back, stroked his gray beard, and chuckled. "Tom, you're not the first they've gone after. They tried to pull the same nonsense with me last year. Claimed my tractor was an unapproved commercial vehicle." "What'd you do?" I asked. Laughed in their faces. "But I'll tell you what, I started keeping everything. Letters, emails, even voicemails. Folks think they can bully, but paper trails don't lie. That stuck with me. Paper trails don't lie. So I doubled down. I started recording phone calls. Whenever Karen or one of her cronies left me a voicemail, I saved it. I had screenshots of emails, photographs of letters, even the envelopes with postmarks. Everything went into a folder I labeled HOA War Chest. And then the jackpot. One of my trail cameras picked up a familiar figure late one evening. Golf cart parked on the path, flashlight in hand, creeping around the junction box. Karen herself, clear as day. When I pulled the SD card and loaded it onto my laptop, I nearly laughed myself out of the chair. There she was, the self-proclaimed queen of neighborhood standards, caught in the act of tampering with my property. It was the smoking gun I needed. Now I wasn't ready to go public yet. No, I wanted to play this smart. The longer I let them dig their own hole, the deeper it would get. My plan was simple: collect, document, prepare. Then when the time was right, drop it all like a hammer. Linda watched me one night, papers spread across the kitchen table, cameras and laptops glowing, and she said, "Tom, you look like one of those detectives in a crime show. Are you sure you're not going overboard?" I looked at her and smiled. "Honey, they picked this fight. I'm just making sure I finish it the right way. Because here's the truth, in battles like these, emotion won't save you. Anger won't save you. Documentation will. Evidence will. Patience will." And I had all three in spades. But I also knew Karen wasn't about to roll over either. If she felt me tightening the noose, she'd lash out. And that's exactly what happened. The more evidence I collected, the more desperate they became. And desperate people, they do stupid, reckless things. What they pulled next was so brazen, so bold, it nearly pushed Linda and me over the edge. But it also proved me right. Karen's arrogance was her weakness. And when she struck back, she gave me everything I needed to bring the whole house of cards crashing down. If you corner a rattlesnake, you better be ready for it to strike. And Karen, she was coiled up and ready to sink her fangs in deep. By the time I had my evidence stacked high, word must have gotten back to her that I wasn't just laughing this off anymore. Maybe she saw me talking with Harris. Maybe she noticed me setting up trail cameras. Or maybe it was just her paranoia, the way control freaks can smell when they're losing their grip. Either way, she came at me harder than ever. It started with zoning. One morning, a county zoning officer showed up at my gate, clipboard in hand. Nice guy, looked uncomfortable, like he already knew this was nonsense. He told me there'd been multiple complaints filed against my ranch for unpermitted commercial activity. I raised an eyebrow. "Commercial activity, sir. I raise cattle. Been doing it here since before half those homes down the street were built." He sighed. "I figured as much. But the HOA claims you're running some kind of business operation, machinery storage, livestock exceeding capacity, that sort of thing." I could see it in his face. He didn't want to be here. But complaints are complaints, and he had to check. So I gave him the tour, showed him the herd, the feed, the barns. He whistled at how clean and orderly everything was. By the time he left, he shook my hand and said, "Don't worry, this won't go anywhere, but I'd keep your eyes open. Someone's out to get you." I didn't need him to tell me who that someone was. Next came the phone calls. With my landline cut, I'd been relying on my cell phone, but somehow don't ask me how my number ended up circulating through the subdivision. Suddenly I was getting calls at all hours. Some hung up the moment I answered. Others left voicemails full of thinly veiled threats, snide comments, or just heavy breathing. Linda's nerves were shot. Every time the phone rang, she jumped. One night, after the 5th call in a row, she snapped, "Tom, they're trying to break us. Can't you see that?" I pulled her close and told her the truth. Yeah, they're trying. But all they're doing is giving me more ammo. Still, I couldn't deny the pressure. It's one thing to fight in broad daylight letters and meetings. It's another when they start creeping into your home, invading your peace. And then, because apparently Karen thought psychological warfare wasn't enough, they went after my animals. One evening I found the gate to my pasture unlatched. Now I'm meticulous about my gates. I check them twice, sometimes 3 times. No way I'd forget. Lucky for me, Duke barked like mad before the herd wandered off. But the thought of someone sneaking onto my land to tamper with my gates, that chilled me in a way the letters never did. I reviewed the trail cam footage later, and sure enough, there was a blurry figure hoodie pulled up, fiddling with the latch, before slipping back toward the subdivision. I couldn't prove it was Karen or one of her lackeys, but I knew. Deep down, I knew. Linda begged me to call the sheriff right then and there. But I held back. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to time it right. A premature move might spook them. No, I needed them to dig deeper to make their arrogance undeniable. And boy did they oblige. A week later, I got a knock at the door. It wasn't the zoning guy this time. It was a sheriff's deputy. He looked tired, irritated, like he'd been dragged out here for something dumb. He told me there'd been multiple noise complaints filed against me again, this time accusing me of running industrial equipment late into the night. I laughed bitterly. "Deputy, the only thing I run at night is my coffee pot," he smirked. "That's what I figured. But I've had to come out here 3 times this month because of these complaints. I'll be honest, Mr. Callahan, it's wasting my time. And if it keeps up, I'm going to have to start looking into who's filing them." And right there, the idea clicked in my head. The seed of the plan that would eventually turn the tables completely. Redirecting calls, straight to the sheriff. But that's a story for later. For now, the war was still raging, and Karen wasn't done swinging. The final straw came when Linda and I tried to enjoy a Sunday afternoon at church. When the service ended, a couple from the subdivision cornered us in the parking lot. They didn't even bother lowering their voices. They told us point blank that people like us were dragging down property values, that we were holding the community back. Linda's cheeks burned with embarrassment. I could see the tears in her eyes as we walked to the truck. That moment lit a fire in me hotter than any summer sun, because now it wasn't just Karen. She'd poisoned the whole well, convinced others that we were the villains. She'd weaponized gossip pride and her stupid little rule book until it felt like the entire subdivision was lined up against us. And yet in all her scheming, Karen made one fatal mistake. She assumed I'd break. She assumed a rancher like me, set in his ways, maybe a little old-fashioned, would fold under pressure. But she didn't know me. And she sure didn't know what I had up my sleeve. Her strike back had only fueled me further. And as I sat on the porch that night, flipping through my folder of evidence, I knew it was almost time to show my cards. Almost time to remind the HOA what happens when you try to bully the wrong man. By the time summer rolled into fall, I'd had enough of Karen's circus. Every call, every letter, every bogus report, it was all fuel on the fire. And I knew if I didn't strike back soon, the harassment would never end. So I started building my plan. First thing I did was call up my old friend Mark. Mark's a lawyer who's been practicing in the county for over 30 years. He's the kind of guy who can quote property law faster than I can saddle a horse. We sat in his office one Tuesday afternoon, stacks of papers spread out across his mahogany desk. When he looked through the letters, the fines, the photos, and especially the trail cam shot of Karen by my junction box, he let out a low whistle. "Tom, they've stepped way over the line. Your ranch isn't under HOA jurisdiction at all. Legally, their fines mean nothing. But this," he tapped the photo of Karen creeping around my phone lines, "this is criminal." I leaned back in my chair. "So what do I do, sue them?" Mark shook his head. "Not yet. Lawsuits take time and she'll drag her feet, spin it like you're the troublemaker. But what you need right now is leverage. Something that turns her power against her." That word leverage stuck in my mind like a nail. On my drive back from town, I kept thinking about it. Leverage. How do you turn a bully's weight against them? That's when I remembered the deputy's words. If it keeps up, I'm going to have to start looking into who's filing them. That was it, the light bulb moment. Karen loved calling the sheriff with complaints. She lived for it. If she wasn't whining about my tractor, she was ranting about my dog or my barn, and every one of those calls wasted county time. But what if? What if I could make sure that every single complaint she made about me went straight back to the sheriff, directly? No middleman, no delay, just her nonsense landing right in the lap of law enforcement. I called the telecom company the next day, explained my phone trouble, told them I wanted to set up a call forwarding system while they repaired the cut lines. The rep was more than happy to oblige. Within an hour, my ranch line was rerouted. Where did those calls go? Straight to the sheriff's office. I chuckled to myself, picturing Karen picking up her phone, dialing my number to scream about my cattle or whatever nonsense she dreamed up that week, only to end up reporting herself to the authorities. It was poetic justice delivered with a dial tone. But I didn't stop there. I rallied allies. Harris, my neighbor, agreed to testify if needed about Karen's harassment. Another rancher down the road, Miss Evelyn, sweetest lady you'll ever meet, told me she'd saved her own stack of nasty letters from the HOA. Even a couple of residents inside the subdivision, tired of Karen's bullying, whispered that they'd back me if it came to a fight. Piece by piece, the cracks in her kingdom widened. Meanwhile, I kept organizing my war chest, every letter in chronological order, every voicemail labeled with dates, every photo printed and backed up digitally. I even bought a binder and filled it with tabs, trespassing, false complaints, phone tampering. Linda thought I'd gone overboard like a detective in one of those late-night television dramas. But I wasn't just playing cop. I was preparing for battle. And then came the cherry on top. I set up one final trail camera hidden in the trees near the HOA's meeting pavilion. I didn't trespass, didn't break any laws, just positioned it where I could capture the crowds spilling out after their monthly get-togethers. That's where I caught footage of Karen, glass of wine in hand, bragging to her cronies about making life miserable for that cowboy down the road. Gold. Pure gold. By now, my plan was locked and loaded. Karen thought she was tightening the screws, but really she was just feeding rope into her own noose. I sat Linda down one evening and explained everything. She looked at me eyes wide. So you're saying, the next time she calls you, she'll be calling the sheriff instead? I grinned. That's exactly right. For the first time in months, I saw relief on her face. She actually laughed, a genuine laugh that made me realize just how much stress she'd been carrying. Tom, you sly old fox. I kissed her hand. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting people trip over their own arrogance. And that's what this was, a setup. A trap built not out of spite, but out of patience, persistence, and a whole lot of documentation. Because I knew what was coming. Karen wasn't going to stop. She'd keep dialing, keep complaining, keep pushing, and every time she did, she'd be dialing herself deeper into trouble. I leaned back on my porch that night, sipping black coffee as the stars blinked overhead. Duke lay at my feet, tail thumping lazily against the boards. For the first time in a long time, I felt calm, because I knew the next move wasn't mine. It was Karen's, and whatever move she made, she'd be making it straight into the hands of the sheriff. The first redirected call came on a Tuesday morning. I was out in the pasture fixing a section of barbed wire when my cell phone buzzed. It was my buddy Deputy Collins from the sheriff's office. He chuckled as soon as I answered. Tom, you'll never believe this. We just got a call from your HOA president. Claimed you were running some kind of unlicensed junkyard. But here's the funny part, she dialed your number. Ended up with us instead. I grinned so wide my jaw hurt. Guess she finally found the right audience. And just like that, the trap started snapping shut. Day after day, Karen and her cronies dialed my number to file complaint after complaint. And every single one routed straight to the sheriff. Noise at dawn, sheriff got the call. Barn paint color, sheriff. My dog barking at coyotes, sheriff. At first, the deputies thought it was a mistake, but when the calls kept coming, the tone shifted. They weren't amused anymore, they were irritated. Their time was being wasted over and over with nonsense. By the end of the week, Deputy Collins called me again. Tom, I don't know what kind of circus you've got going on with that HOA, but I'll tell you this, if they keep filing false reports, we're going to have no choice but to open an investigation. This is bordering on harassment. Music to my ears. Meanwhile, I kept stacking my evidence, biding my time. I wanted the confrontation to happen publicly where Karen couldn't slink away or twist the story, and soon enough I got my chance. The county scheduled a hearing to address ongoing community disputes. Apparently the flood of HOA complaints had raised enough eyebrows that the board decided it was time to sit everyone down and sort it out. Karen was practically salivating at the chance to show off her evidence against me. Little did she know I was coming armed with more than stories. The day of the hearing, I walked into the county building in my best boots, clean shirt tucked in binder under my arm. Linda was by my side, steady as ever, though I could feel her tension humming like a wire. Across the room sat Karen and her crew, smug smiles plastered on their faces. She clutched her clipboard like it was a crown scepter. The board opened the floor. Karen strutted up first, heels clicking on the tile. She launched into a speech about how my ranch was degrading community value, how my unregulated activities posed a threat to neighborhood safety. She flashed photos, waved letters, and even tried to paint me as some sort of outlaw squatter. For a few minutes, the room seemed to lean her way. People nodded, whispered. She was good at spinning a tale, arrogance wrapped in legal-sounding jargon. But then it was my turn. I stood slow and deliberate and carried my binder to the podium. My voice was calm, steady, like I was telling a story to an old friend. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you hearing us out today. I want to make one thing clear: my ranch is not and never has been under HOA jurisdiction. This land has been in my family for decades. Their rules stop at their subdivision fence. And everything they've sent me, every letter, every so-called fine, it's smoke and mirrors. I flipped open the binder and began laying it out. First, the county deed records proving my property was exempt. Then the stack of letters, each one nastier than the last. I held up the trail cam photos of Karen snooping around my junction box. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's face went pale. And it doesn't stop there, I continued. This HOA president has filed false complaints with animal control, zoning, and the sheriff's office. But here's the kicker. I paused for effect. Every single call she's made to my ranch line this past month hasn't come to me. They've gone straight to the sheriff's department. And guess what? They've all been documented as false reports. At that, Deputy Collins, who'd been sitting quietly in the back, stood up. That's correct. We've received multiple calls originating from HOA members. All baseless. All wasting county resources. You could feel the shift in the room. Whispers turned into stares, all directed at Karen. Her clipboard trembled in her hands. I wasn't done. I pulled out the last piece, financial records, showing her cozy deals with her cousin's contracting company. Inflated invoices, all approved under her watch. Not only is she harassing neighbors outside her jurisdiction, but she's lining pockets while she does it. The board chair cleared his throat, face flushed. Mrs. Karen, do you have a response to these allegations? Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She stammered, sputtered, tried to regain her footing, but the room had turned. Even her own board members avoided her eyes. And in that moment, I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to shout. I just stood there, binder in hand, letting the truth do the talking. By the end of the hearing, the decision was clear. The county reprimanded the HOA for overreach. An investigation was opened into Karen's misuse of funds, and the sheriff's department filed a formal warning against her for repeated false reports. It was over. Just like that, the bully had been unmasked, her power crumbling in the very place she thought she'd shine. As Linda and I walked out of the building, she squeezed my hand. "Tom," she whispered, voice shaking, "you did it." I nodded, but inside I felt something deeper. It wasn't just about me. It was about every neighbor she'd bullied, every family she'd intimidated. For once, the tables had turned. And Karen, she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, a queen without a crown. But the story wasn't finished yet. Because even after a victory, that sweet life has a way of leaving you with lessons you don't forget. When the gavel fell at that county hearing, it didn't just silence Karen, it changed everything. The days that followed felt like a heavy storm had finally passed. For the first time in months, my phone didn't buzz with petty harassment. No letters in the mailbox. No HOA board members skulking by my fences with cameras. The silence was almost strange, like when cicadas stop buzzing on a summer night. Word spread fast in our little community. Folks who'd once looked at me sideways in the diner now came over, clapped me on the shoulder, and said, "Good job, Tom." About time someone stood up to them. Even a few subdivision residents who had lived under Karen's thumb for years approached me to say thank you. One woman admitted she'd cried when she saw Karen finally get called out in public. Karen herself, she vanished from the spotlight. At first she tried to hold her ground, but once the county announced their investigation into her financial dealings, the HOA board turned on her like vultures. Within weeks, she'd resigned, citing health reasons. Everyone knew the truth, though. Her reign was over. Life at the ranch slipped back into the rhythm I loved. Mornings on the porch with Linda and a steaming cup of coffee, the smell of mesquite drifting from the barn. Duke lazed in the sun without barking at trespassers. The pasture gates stayed locked, undisturbed. For the first time in nearly a year, we breathed easy. But I'll admit, something inside me had changed. When you spend months being harassed, threatened, and lied about, it leaves a mark. At first it makes you angry. Then it makes you tired. But if you stand your ground, if you endure long enough, it can also make you sharper, stronger, more sure of yourself. Linda saw it in me. One evening, as we watched the sun dip low over the horizon, she leaned against my shoulder and said, "You're different now, Tom. Not harder, just steadier. Like you know no one can push you off your land again." She was right. I felt anchored in a way I hadn't before. And maybe the sweetest part of all was the peace. The coffee tasted better. The guitar sounded richer. Even the creak of the old windmill felt like a hymn. It wasn't just about winning, it was about reclaiming the quiet, the dignity, and the freedom Karen had tried to take. I won't lie, a part of me relished the irony that it was her own obsession with rules and power that brought her down. She'd thought she could control me, silence me, break me, but in the end, her arrogance handed me the rope to tie the knot. These days, I still keep that binder. The HOA war chest, Linda jokingly calls it. It sits on a shelf in my office, not because I think I'll need it again, but because it reminds me of a truth carved into every fence post on this ranch. When someone comes after what's yours, you don't just fight back, you fight smart. I don't hate Karen. Truth is, I pity her. People who live for control rarely find peace. They're always looking for the next person to dominate, the next rule to enforce. But when the curtain falls and their power slips away, they're left with nothing but bitterness. That's no way to live. Me, I'll take my cows, my porch coffee, my wife's laughter, and a dog snoring at my feet any day. Because in the end, that's what matters. Not clipboards, not rules, not fines, just the simple, stubborn joy of living free. If there's one lesson I'd want you to carry from this story, it's this: never let bullies steal your peace. They'll try to wear you down, chip away at you piece by piece until you start to doubt yourself. But you've got more strength than you know. Stand firm, keep records, fight smart, not loud. And remember, the truth has a way of surfacing when you hold your ground. I thought I was just defending a ranch, a fence line, a barn, but really I was defending something bigger, the right to live free from intimidation. And that's a fight worth standing for, no matter who's on the other side. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced down an HOA or a bully neighbor? Share your story in the comments. And if you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join our growing community for more HOA stories.